Please mute your device until you're speaking and do not present your screen. You will need some way to jot notes during this meeting, but don't try to furiously record everything that's being said because you'll be able to review materials afterwards. We'll hold the meeting to the established time, but there's the opportunity to share digitally later. This is an overview of the features and layout of Google Meets if this is your first time in this platform. The main features to note is going to be that red microphone icon, the red phone icon if you'd like to leave the meeting, and the microphone icon all the way on the left if you'd like to mute or unmute. So let's do a roll call. Who are you and what brings you here? Please drop your letter in the chat. Are you A, interested in becoming a teaching artist offering programs to learners? Are you B, currently working as a teaching artist offering programs to learners? Or C, some other type of practitioner, some other reason has brought you here, and feel free to share that in the chat. I'll review what you all drop in just a moment, but we're going to talk a little bit about MSAC. So our equity and justice statement is as follows. The arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council and its supporting collaborators are committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organizations and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, class, language, and/or ability. The vision of the Maryland State Arts Council is to play an essential role in ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And our mission is to advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. We have 5 goals from the strategic implementation plan that was finalized in 2019. Goal 1, increase participation. Goal 2, provide intentional support. Goal 3, build capacity. Goal 4, leverage connections. Goal 5, bolster Maryland arts. The how to apply to the AIE roster webinar is mostly going to touch on goal 1, broaden MSAC's constituency, providing avenues designed to increase pathways to engagement, as well as goal 2, embrace thoughtful and targeted approaches to serving known and yet to be known MSAC constituents. And goal 5, we want to showcase the high caliber, diverse, and relevant work of Maryland artists and arts organizations, their contributions to community vitality, and MSAC's role as a catalyst. Our creative meeting actions are to celebrate being in the space with other creative people, engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge that together we know a lot. Enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry. Share your idea and trust that it will be heard. Use I statements. Focus your language on the task at hand. Hold one another accountable with care. Apply yes and. I hear your idea and I'm going to add to it. Balance speaking and listening. The flow for today, we just went through those grounding slides introducing MSAC's mission and goals. We're going to get a little bit of context for arts and education at MSAC, go over the arts and education roster specifically, have a break for questions. There may be some questions that I ask you to hold for follow-up outside of the webinar, but there will be multiple opportunities to ask questions and get some further clarification. Then we're going to orient to how do we apply for the roster and how do we enter information into Smart Simple. Another break for questions. Then we'll go over the review process and timeline and how you can reach out for more information. So next poll, what is your arts discipline? Please drop your letters in the chat. Do you practice D, dance, E, music, F, visual arts, G, arts integration, H, literary arts, I, theater, J, media arts, or K, other? And feel free to explain. While folks are dropping that in the chat, I will also scroll up and see who we have in the room today. It looks like we have a good mix of folks who are currently working as teaching artists and some folks who are new, as well as some folks that have other reasons for joining us today. Whatever brings you here, I'm so happy that you're able to join us. If you have joined recently, please know that the webinar is being recorded and the slides will be posted along with the recording. So Arts and Education at the Maryland State Arts Council has 3 programs or branches. We won't be talking about Poetry Out Loud today, but just so you know, it is a national poetry recitation competition for high schoolers, and more information about this year's competition will be shared around October. We also have the Arts and Education Grant, which is a grant providing matching funds to Maryland-based schools and sites for educational engagements that are led by roster teaching artists. And that roster is a curated directory of Maryland-based teaching artists who lead a variety of arts education programs. So in the fall of 2019 and the winter of 2020, the Maryland State Arts Council convened over 60 public constituents to serve as editors to re-envision the arts and education program. There were 4 phases. Phase 1, equitable funding in arts and education. Phase 2, teaching artist roster policies. Phase 3, the Arts and Education Grant application, and Phase 4, alignment with MSAC's internal procedures. And here we have a photo of lovely editors from Phase 3 looking at the grant application. I won't go into too many of the takeaways from that process. That was covered in the How to Apply to the Arts and Education Grant webinar last week, which the recording and slides for that are available if you have any questions. But the main takeaway that applies for the roster from that review process is that the visiting and performance roster and artist and residence roster that used to be the title for programs at MSAC was now shifted to the teaching artist roster, and the types of engagements have been expanded beyond visiting performances and residencies. On this slide, there are links to visual flow charts if you're just trying to figure out what are the different steps for both of these applications, the Arts and Education Grant application and the Teaching Artist roster. What do I do first? What happens next? You can reference those links to see that information visually, but it's important to know that roster applications are accepted on a rolling basis and reviewed quarterly in 2 phases, and that the Arts and Education Grant applications are accepted on a rolling basis and reviewed monthly. And thank you, chat, for dropping those links into the chat if you'd like to look at them right now. So the Teaching Artist roster, this listing of Maryland-based independent artists and organizations who've been selected through a panel review process. Teaching artists provide arts education experiences that deepen lifelong learning in school and community settings. Here we have a photo of a table of adults working on a visual arts project led by one of our roster artists. Again, roster applications are accepted on a rolling basis and reviewed in 2 phases. Online applications are phase 1, reviewed quarterly. Site visits are phase 2, and those are conducted based on the applicant and evaluator's availability, whether that's virtually or in person at some later date when that is safe to occur. Teaching artist roster benefits. What is the point of joining the roster? You will have connections to a statewide network of organizations and nonprofits that lead professional development for teaching artists, individual feedback and evaluation sessions to help strengthen your programming, heightened visibility through print and online marketing, including MSAC's Artist Directory, and funding opportunities for the cost of teaching artists' fees and expenses, which provides financial incentive for Maryland schools and community groups to book teaching artists. So those funding opportunities, that's connected to the Arts and Education Grant, which we'll have an overview of, but then we'll move on to talk more specifically about applying to the roster. I do want to point out the photo here of Joanne Margolius of Magical Experiences Art Company engaging learner Nikita from the Del Rey School. And the previous photo that I want to say was a community setting. So I just want to point out that those 2 photos can show the different types of settings and engagements that are available through these funding opportunities that we're going to discuss. So the Arts and Education Grant and the Teaching Artist roster work together to accomplish the mission of the Arts and Education program. So the Arts and Education Grant is a collaborative application between a current roster artist and a school or site. These funds can cover artist fees and stipends, admission costs, contractual services, transportation, art materials for teaching artists leading engagements like field trips, lectures, out of school time programs, online programs, which can be any of these other engagements as well, professional development, residencies, visiting performances, and workshops. The populations and communities that we strive to serve are early childhood audience, so 0 to 3 years old, grades PK to 2, grades 3 to 5, middle schoolers, high schoolers, out of school time populations like campers or spring breakers, folks who are veterans or serve in the military, creative aging, so older adults 55 to 65 and older, people experiencing incarceration or reentry, people with disabilities. This includes people with cognitive, social, emotional, and or physical disabilities, folks from the LGBTQ plus community, people experiencing housing instability, English language learners, educators, and any other population or community that's not covered here, but that you're serving. Perhaps it's families, some intergenerational communities. It's really up to you and your work. So the Arts and Education Grant, again, works with the roster to accomplish the mission of the AIE program at MSAC, because our teaching artists have experience with many communities and lots of educational offerings, and we fund them up to $5,000 with a matching requirement for the school or site, but match waivers are available. If you'd like to know more about that, I recommend that you check out the How to Apply to the AIE Grant webinar. But it's important to note that schools or sites may be awarded up to 2 AIE grants per fiscal year, but teaching artists may be awarded multiple times in a year. So here we have a lovely photo of Whitehall Elementary School students at a performance by Barry Lewis Polisar. So this school could only be awarded twice in a fiscal year, but Barry Lewis Polisar as a teaching artist could work at Whitehall Elementary School and several others and be funded multiple times within one fiscal year. So this is a brief overview of the application before we get into some questions and then dive even deeper into the application. You're going to be asked to provide evidence of your experience, a scope of an educational engagement, a teaching artist statement, and your electronic signatures. But we'll move on to questions, and while folks are preparing to unmute or to drop your question in the chat, I'm going to see the spread of disciplines that we have with us today.
Hello.
Hello.
Can I say something real quick?
Yes, please.
My area is in the middle of a tornado watch, and we've been told to go to our basements. So I'm not going to be able to listen in.
That's absolutely fine. I will be emailing the slides and the recording after, hopefully tomorrow, but certainly by next week. So you will have this information.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem. And I hope you're able to stay safe.
I hope so too. Bye-bye.
Bye. I see design, several Fs, a couple of designs actually, a B. I think I've seen every letter. Are there any other questions about what we've covered so far? Yes, Marcy.
So I think I just heard visual arts, so I right away put F, but the next one was G, was arts integration. Is that right? Is that like if you already practice arts integration with the state's curriculum, or what does that mean?
So I would distinguish visual arts and arts integration by thinking about, are you helping students through a photography exercise, or are you doing a STEAM project talking about the citric acid cycle and using photography? That second example would be arts integration, and the first one would be visual arts. It's, you could probably argue, you could probably make a case for either, but that's the first thing that comes to mind for me about distinguishing those two.
Okay, I guess it's all in the application. However,
Sorry,
you
could
can
you say the last part?
Oh, sorry. I guess it's all in the application, how you document it.
What I meant by that was more so it's up to you how you want to define your work. If you feel that you're only focusing on visual arts, but you're not integrating it with any content, like English language arts, history, social studies, math, that would be the difference that I would say between arts integration and then another discipline.
Okay, thanks.
I see a hand raised from Rachel Ann Cross.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I know that there used to be a showcase for performing artists, and that's how people could find out about you. But as a visual artist, how do some of these institutions find out about you if you're new to the roster?
So marketing is something that we're open to hearing from applicants and roster artists, how we can best support you with marketing. We do have the artist registry or artist directory So that is a space where you can make a profile that lots of folks can see. We do also host networking opportunities and reach out to other grantees to see if we can connect our teaching artists with other organizations and sites in our network. But that, I'd like to save a little bit of that for later in the webinar, just because it's after you are on the roster.
Okay, so the artist directory is different than the teaching artist roster, or are they the same?
Yes, thank you. Perfect question. They are different. The teaching artist roster is different from the artist directory. Anyone can have a profile right now on the artist directory, and it has nothing to do with your roster status. It's just a repository for folks to share the work that they're doing. The teaching artist roster is separate, but we do ask roster artists to have a profile on the registry.
Thank you. That was, now like it makes sense. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for that question. I see one in the chat from Valerie. Can a school be awarded up to $10,000 a year split into 2 applications, or is there an award limit per year? So any application that you submit, the max amount of money that can be requested is going to be $5,000 for one application. So if a school has 2 awards and both of them were $5,000, then that would equal $10,000. But sometimes folks submit an application and they're not asking for the full $5,000. They just need $1,800 for the educational engagement that they're leading. I do want to note that the funds don't go directly to the school. So it's actually the teaching artist that would be awarded that money. And yes, 2 applications, because the cap is $5,000 per application, and the award limit per year is for schools or sites. 2 per school or site in a fiscal year, but teaching artists can be funded multiple times within a year. So if we were to do the max number for a school and say it's $10,000, there's not that same max for a teaching artist. A teaching artist can receive more than $10,000 a year, but one school or site, if they were connected to an application asking for the $5,000, that would be the cap of $10,000. Sorry if that was very circular, but I wanted to hit those points. Is there a money limit per each county? No, this is connected to the equitable funding formula that comes into play when we are talking about the Arts and Education grant, but that is not a strict rule. It's a guideline. It's how MSAC on the back end is tracking how funds are distributed across counties. So then we can give updates and say, hey, Prince George's County has gotten several awards this year, but Wacomico or Calvert County, there's money that could be spent there. So we'd encourage teaching artists to reach out to those county arts councils. We can put you in contact with them and see what schools and sites might be in counties that have not received as much funding at the time of that quarterly fiscal update. All right, let's move on to eligibility and submitting an application. I see 2 more questions. So feel free to drop your letter in the chat for this poll while I read these questions. Will these funds grants be awarded for virtual programs and residencies and make it possible for teaching across the state? Yes, yes. Virtual programs. It can be a virtual residency, a virtual workshop, virtual professional development. We do fund virtual engagements for sure. And yes, teaching across the state, yes. Do teaching artists have to do their work in the same county where they live? No, no. We would love for more folks to work in all 24 counties of the state. So you do not have to live in the counties where you are working. So I see some responses for this poll. Where do you work most often? Do you mostly work in L, school settings during the school day, M, community settings and or outside of the school day, but still in a school? N, do you alternate between school and community sites? Because it can really depend on the day or the season or other, and feel free to share. I will look at some of these later, but I see, virtually, a lot of community sites and a few school sites. So what should you know before you apply? You should check your eligibility. That'll be the next slide, but you want to make sure that you are eligible to apply and you want to read the guidelines. We're going over a lot of the information that's in the guidelines, but it's important that you still familiarize yourself with that information. You should also register for a Smart Simple account so you can submit an application. And if all else fails, just contact MSAC for technical support or questions. Happy to help you before you apply rather than sending a technical review notice after you've submitted. So eligibility. If you are an independent artist, you must be 18 years of age or older at the time that you apply, and a Maryland resident for at least 6 months before you're submitting. And you should continue to have a primary Maryland address while you're active on the roster. If you're an organization, you should be based in Maryland, completed at least one documented fiscal year, and be either a 501c3 or a unit of government or a University System of Maryland member. So now we're going to get into the application questions themselves. There are some questions that are not scored. That's what's on this page, is just information gathering. So what is the discipline that you represent? What are the populations and communities that you immediately intend to reach through this application process? We saw a lot of communities, and I don't want you to select all of the ones that you'd like to work with over the course of your career as you're applying, just the ones that you plan to immediately reach through this application. For educational engagement types, you should also select the ones that you intend to offer immediately upon roster acceptance. After you join, anything else that you're interested in can be added to your profile following a site visit. And the same goes for communities and populations. If you don't currently work with older adults, but you'd like to, you can add them later.
We have 2 questions. Would you prefer to take them now or hold until the next question slide?
If they're about material that we've already covered, if anyone can drop in the chat to give an indication, if it's stuff that we've gone through and you just want to clarify it, then I'd like to answer them now. But there are a couple of question breaks later if it's not about this so far. Okay, yes, a clarification about eligibility.
Hi. I was trying to turn my camera. I guess it's not working. Trying to turn on my camera. Anyway, hi. So I had a question. I have an arts organization, but we are not a 501c3. We are, and I saw someone else asked about fiscal sponsorship. We are fiscally sponsored by a 501c3, but I know that even with fiscal sponsorship, that there were questions about what that relationship looked like between the organization and the fiscal sponsor in terms of if you were eligible. So I guess the first question was, what that relationship would need to be if you were fiscally sponsored, and then if I was to apply as an individual, could it be a program that I do as an organization, which sounds weird because like we're on other rosters, other state, other county arts council rosters, as our organization without having to be a 501c3. And I wanted to offer those same programs as part of being on this roster, but because we're not 501c3, what would that look like?
Okay. So from what I'll say based on what I understand so far is that we do have fiscal agents. So those fiscal agents have applied. They are on the roster, and then they have kind of an ensemble of roster artists. We do currently have several examples of that case where there's a fiscal agent that is an organization, and the individuals that are funded their own applications like separately from each other because they're an ensemble of roster artists. We do have that set up. I think there was another part to what you asked though.
Oh, it was if even with that, if we weren't able to be a part, because I think maybe you're talking about things like young audiences or those sorts of people who have rosters. So our fiscal sponsor is Fractured Atlas in New York, and our relationship with them is purely that we are, like, for example, for donations, people donate to them on our behalf and they take a cut, but they have nothing to do with our day-to-day running of our programs. It's just in order for us to be able to receive grants or tax deductible donations. So I think we may not be able still with that to be eligible for this through our organization. Yes, Madeline Gorman, yay, it seems like we have the same questions. But then the other part was if we weren't eligible through that and then had to apply as individuals, would we do that and maybe put in parentheses our organization or Lynn Childress of my organization of, I guess, what would that look like? And I want to be completely honest and not be that I'm trying to, fudge stuff through.
Yeah, thank you. So you're absolutely right. The examples that I was thinking of, to my knowledge, are still based in Maryland to some degree. So I will follow up when I send materials out with an answer about this, considering a fiscal agent that's not based in Maryland. And so do you then need to apply as an individual, and if there's any additional considerations for that?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to see that somebody else had the same question. All right, so educational engagement types that are supported by the MSAC Arts and Education Program. So a residency, that's going to be when an artist provides a sequential arts learning workshop to students over a period of time, and it may include a culminating project or presentation, but it doesn't necessarily have to. A visiting performance is going to be a presentation of one or more performances for assembly programs that travel to a destination identified by the applicant, like an auditorium, a rec center, a community organization, and more. A field trip is an activity where the audience is meant to go to the presenting organization's venue for the experience. And this could be a performance, a gallery tour, a presentation, or some other activity. And virtual field trips do count. Virtual anything counts considering the global pandemic. Professional development, activities of any length or course of time that strengthen identified skills for a specified audience, like educators or families, parents. Online programs, these are educational engagements conducted in a virtual setting. And again, that can be an online residency, an online visiting performance, an online field trip. Online programs can happen asynchronously, synchronously, or they can be in a hybrid. So that could be independent learning that doesn't have any real-time interaction, or it is simultaneously learning with other folks in real time, or a blend. Out of school time programs, that's an arts learning experience that's presented just outside of the normal classroom day, say that's 7 to 2 or 8 to 3. A lecture is when an artist presents a talk or a conversation for a one-time event. And a workshop is when an artist facilitates an arts experience. That's the bare bones of a workshop. This usually occurs within one day, but it doesn't always have to. So for the application, you are going to attach evidence of your experience, training, and professional development as a teaching artist. You should submit at least one example that reflects your expertise and knowledge of your selected arts discipline. And you should submit at least one example demonstrating your ability to teach the selected populations and communities you've identified. Examples may include, but certainly aren't limited to, a resume, artist bio, a CV, certificates of completion, letters of support, or a sample portfolio, and more. An excellent to outstanding response for this review criteria is going to have clear and thorough detail of experience that aligns with the selected populations or communities and the arts discipline. You're also going to upload a detailed example of programming that you've designed for whichever educational engagement types you want reviewed. So this example that you upload should summarize the program's activities, list the sequence of activities such as proposed timing and pacing, and identify applicable state and/or national standards or competencies that meet the needs and desires of the selected population or communities being served. You can find examples of standards and competencies in the roster guidelines at msac.org. And an excellent to outstanding answer for this review criteria is going to highly demonstrate the chosen state and national standards or competencies, as well as how they show up in the activities that you've proposed, alignment of those competencies with the needs of the populations and communities being served, and that your objectives, learning goals, and pacing are appropriate. That what's accomplished or completed at the end of the activity, that your intentions for student growth in content, actions, process, and progress, and that the big idea or broad concept that the learning is connected to, that all of those things feel appropriate for the folks that you've identified you'll be working with. You're also going to submit a teaching artist statement that addresses the following questions. What is your creative process and how does it inform the design of your arts education engagements? How is your planning and delivery informed by accessibility, equity, and justice? How do you adapt your content and arts instruction to support participants' needs? How does your experience and background demonstrate readiness to join the roster and enrich arts education opportunities in Maryland? As well as any additional information you want the panel to take in mind as they are reviewing your submission. An excellent to outstanding answer for this review criteria is going to highly demonstrate a clear description of the applicant's creative process and how it connects to preparing arts education engagements. It's going to embody equity, justice, and accessibility in the arts through openness, adaptability to evolving community needs, and ensuring meaningful participation. It'll also demonstrate potential to apply your experience for long-term success. It's going to reveal that inclusion on the roster would have deep and/or wide-reaching benefit to Maryland learners. So we have another break for questions before we quickly go into Smart Simple. if we are offering a virtual program, how is it observed or reviewed? So there's the site visit process that will be discussed a little bit later. You can be observed during phase 2 of the application, the site visit, and then if you want to add populations or educational engagements to your profile once you're on the roster. So that will be covered in just a moment. If most of the interaction by a teaching artist is with college level students, is this experience considered sufficient to adapt to other groups? So I want to make sure I'm understanding this. Is it about age level? Because if you want to work with adult learners, anyone over 18, any standards or competencies that you would reference, you could use like the proficient high school level for guiding your detailed scope and sequence that way. Ages and abilities. I'd also, in this instance, recommend taking MCREDs, Maryland credentials, from the Maryland State Department of Education's Fine Arts Office. They have free professional development that touches on what is appropriate for different grade bands. Did I quite answer that question? Was there more to it? And are there any other questions before we move on to Smart Simple? Mercy.
Yeah, I just have a question. Like I've been working with seniors and adults with dementia for many years, and what you just said, does this mean I have to go to the high school curriculum and talk about that?
So some of the standards and competencies linked in the guidelines include social emotional learning. It's not, you can use something that's not strictly based on the school setting. If you are looking for guidance about what to use with adult learners, then you could refer to what is proficient at the high school level. So it's not, that previous statement wasn't said as a hard and fast rule, just as a reference.
Okay, so the same would be for, like, I also work with youth with emotional struggles. So I guess I would hit the social emotional, but I do focus on building, skill building. Anyway.
Yes, any state or national standards or competencies, so any materials that have been kind of identified, compiled, consolidated as best practice that you could refer to, that's what you should include in your scope and sequence, but it's up to you what you choose. And there are suggestions in the guidelines. So if there are specific materials that you're thinking of that you'd like to confirm with that work, you can certainly email me and we can have a discussion from there.
Okay, thanks.
Is there a standard rate for workshops and residencies? Who helps determine the rates? This is a little bit more of a arts and education grant question, but I will say that MSAC does not set rates at this time, and that you could refer to the Teaching Artists Guild for resources about setting your own rate, or TAMA, Teaching Artists of the Mid-Atlantic. They can also give you some sense of what's going on in the field right now. But MSAC does not want to say what your labor and expertise is worth, especially with all of the disciplines and different populations and different ways that folks come into being a teaching artist. We don't want to make that decision for you. But if you're looking for help, because I mean, I've worked as a teaching artist where when I broke down my rate, one time it was $12 an hour and another time it was $60 an hour or more. So if you're looking for guidance, I would recommend the Teaching Artists Guild or TAMA, and Chad just dropped links for both of those in the chat. Thank you, Chad. Aaron, do the MCREDS courses also apply to performing artists or fine arts alone? Yes, performing artists as well. Music, dance, theater. Yes, it's sponsored by MSDE's Fine Arts Office, but it's not just visual fine arts.
All right, thank you. I was looking at their listed requirements for the first course, the Learning Through the Creative Process, and it says have the materials you need for your artistic practice, like paints or a camera or dance shoes. It's like, we bring ourselves,
Right?
We are our own tools. So I wasn't sure, just from the way it was phrased, whether we were included or not.
Absolutely. I'm a theater practitioner and I've taken Learning Through the Creative Process. I highly, highly recommend it. It just helped me identify how do I move through the stages of generating material? How do I take something from being inspired all the way to presenting it and reflecting on it? And I will also say that there may be some wiggle room with prerequisites right now for MCRED. So if you see another course like Creative Aging or Supporting LGBTQ+ youth and their families that you want to take, but you've not yet taken Learning Through the Creative Process, I believe there's a grace period where you can sign up for what's currently available as long as you complete Learning Through the Creative Process within the year. But I highly recommend everyone take that course. I had a great time. Do the standards include STEAM? So there's fine arts standards and then there's content standards. So you could certainly pull standards from physics, biology, chemistry, some other place, and include those standards if you're thinking about an arts integration educational engagement scope. Let's say I get on the roster. Is there a means of matchmaking so a school or senior center may be encouraged to work with you? I'm thinking back to individual county arts councils, and there was not much assistance, and I found that independent contractors are outsiders and you may need an in to work with the school. We're absolutely working on supporting folks and connecting with sites more. And we have been doing some networking sessions, but this question is a little bit more for once you're on the roster. So I want to get through Smart Simple and then see if I can touch on this more later.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So first, you want to go to marylandarts.smartsimple.com and either log in or register. When you log in, you'll see the grantee home dashboard. Click funding opportunities and select apply now under the Arts and Education Teaching Artist roster application. And from this grantee home dashboard is where you can also access any of your draft applications via the in progress section. It's always important to click save draft. Sometimes there are fields that actually won't even appear until you hit save draft that first time. So when in doubt, click save. And if you're finished with all your edits, then simply hit submit or complete to finalize your submission. The phase 1 review process. AIE roster panel reviews are completed quarterly, and the schedule for this fiscal year is September, December, then March 2022, and June 2022. Applications submitted by the first day of these quarters will be reviewed by a panel within that same month. So if your application is received after 11:59 p.m. on the first day of the month, then it will be reviewed by the panel in the following quarter. And teaching artists will be notified of their phase 1 status at the top of the month after their application was reviewed. So if you submit by September 1st at 11:59 p.m., you'll be notified by October 5th. But please note that notifications do not go out automatically at a set time, because the first of the month can fall on a different day of the week each go round. The phase 2 review process. So if you've been notified that you have moved on to phase 2 after you've submitted an online application, then you're going to schedule a site visit orientation, and that's going to go over all of the details about how you can be reviewed virtually. An arts and education evaluator will observe one program that you're immediately ready to offer and then make recommendations about your application status. But site visits can happen at any time. If you need more time to develop your program, or you want to wait until schools are back in session because in-person work is where you feel your work is the strongest, that's absolutely fine. So you could submit for September 1st, be notified about your phase 1 status in October, and then say, I will do my site visit in April, and that's perfectly fine. The types of remote site visits: synchronous, asynchronous, or hybrid. Something where you are supplying a Google Meets, Zoom, or whatever platform link that you have access to, and evaluators join Saturday from 2 to 3 at a link for this library's program. Or it could be asynchronous. Perhaps you have recorded something in the past and you want to submit that. Or it could be a blend of both. Maybe you have some asynchronous material, some recorded materials, or not real-time based materials that you want evaluators to review before joining you for some real-time component. So yes, if you happen to have taped residencies, you can use those as site visits for sure. So roster status. After phase 1, the online application, if you're not selected to move on to a site visit, you can request a feedback appointment, and you can apply again at any time. So you could submit for September, perhaps you hear in October that you're not moving on. You can have a feedback appointment and then submit for the December review. Phase 2, after the site visit, if an applicant's not selected to join the roster, again, you can request a feedback appointment and you can schedule another site visit at any time. If you are selected to join the roster after your site visit, but you don't confirm that you want to join the roster and schedule an orientation after a month and 3 notifications, then the application will be considered closed. Your requirements once you're on the roster: attend a formal orientation to learn about the roster and the grant. To create and consistently maintain your artist registry profile. This is including any requests to update your profile. That turnaround time can be 2 to 3 weeks. And you'll be personally responsible for any MSAC required documentation or reporting for your educational engagements as it's connected to your arts and education grant applications. You're going to collaborate with site coordinators to submit those applications, agree to scheduled periodic site visits. That's really just an opportunity for feedback. It's not punitive. And we ask that you complete at least 1 educational engagement in a fiscal year, funded by MSAC or not, or just schedule a check-in to say, hey, I'm taking a sabbatical this year. I see, does MSAC arrange the site visit or does the artist need to set it up? We can support you if you don't have an audience for a site visit, but we do ask that you do some level of setting it up, but that's more a question once you get past phase one. And there's an orientation once you're past phase one that goes into site visits in depth. Any other questions?
Catherine, I think Marcy had a question about is there a matchmaking between MSAC and schools or senior centers or individual arts councils?
So we held in December a networking session for out of school time providers and teaching artists. And the teaching artists that joined, some of them were on our roster, but some of them were not. Some folks were new to MSAC. And that was an opportunity for out of school time providers to say, this is how my my summer camp or my after school programming is set up, and this is what I'm looking for. And then teaching artists were able to say, this is the work that I do. Everyone could add their information to a Padlet that's still available, so they could then connect with each other because they uploaded their own information. But for senior centers specifically, MSDE has the creative aging micro credential, and after folks took that credential, they did have a session where they had senior centers that could hear brief presentations from the teaching artists that took that course about what they'd like to do at a creative aging facility. We are at time, so I'm gonna just skedaddle ahead to my contact information. So any other questions can be emailed, or you can set up a meeting with me. Thank you all so much for your time, and I look forward to being in touch with you.